everybody, and welcome to my list of the top 10 worst items in The Binding of Isaac. I've already done a list of my favorite items in The Binding of Isaac, so it only seemed natural for me to now go through my 10 least favorite items from a game that doesn't have a shortage of confusing, ineffective, or just plain bad pickups. As always, this is just one man's opinion, and I encourage you to direct your vitriol towards me in the comments section below, and without further ado, let's get started. Number 10, Pageant Boy. Nothing takes the wind out of your sails after beating a difficult boss like having Pageant Boy show up as your only reward. Sure, the item does give you at least a little extra money, and in the rare cases that it spawns random nickels or dimes, that money can actually make a tangible positive impact on your run. However, most of the time I'm actually hoping for an item that upgrades my stats immediately, rather than one that could prove ultimately useless depending on the kinds of shops I run into. So, Pageant Boy isn't necessarily total garbage, but it's disappointing enough to land as the 10th worst item on my list. Number 9, Monster Manuel or Monster Manual, depending on how you feel about it. A running theme with this list is the inclusion of bad spacebar items that not only don't help you out very much, they actively take up a spot in your inventory that could be used for something useful. And in that regard, Monster Manuel definitely fits the bill. Picking up a familiar is usually a decent upgrade in any Isaac run, but Monster Manuel merely gives you one random temporary follower once every 4 rooms, and that's simply not enough to make it a viable spacebar item. Assuming you have almost any other options at all, Monster Manuel is merely 1/4 as good as your average familiar, and that's why it's my pick for the 9th worst item in Isaac. Number 8, Portable Slot. Now before I get into this, I should explain that I have indeed seen and been a part of Isaac runs where Portable Slot was used very effectively. However, on average, I found Portable Slot to usually be a waste of a perfectly good spacebar item. To be fair, if you have a ton of money and are low on keys, bombs, or health, then it can sometimes be a worthwhile investment. However, there are usually already a ton of slot machines scattered throughout the game, so it's rare that portable slots provide much of a benefit that the game itself doesn't already give you. So even though it can occasionally be exploited for personal gain, the portable slots are usually dead weight, and that's why they're in the number 8 spot on my list. Number 7, Notched Axe. The Notched Axe is one of those items in Isaac that might not necessarily be awful, it's just that it's largely useless most of the time. Assuming you have literally any bombs at all, the spacebar slot taken up by Notched Axe is probably going to be better used by almost any other item in the entire game, making it a pickup that is worthwhile only in rare situations, and even in those situations it's not really all that useful. Still, it can occasionally provide a benefit, and that's why Notched Axe comes in at number 7 on my list instead of faring much worse. Number 6, Wiggle Worm. Yet another item in the game that is useless, if not entirely awful. Wiggle Worm may indeed be the most bewildering item in the entire game. At first glance, all it appears to do is change your mode of fire from a straight line into sort of a wave, which may not completely ruin your run, but it certainly does make enemies harder to hit. The silver lining is that it also apparently increases your rate of fire slightly, but you'll have to take the wiki's word on that, as I'm usually too distracted with trying to land my newfangled shots to actually notice. So although Wiggle Worm may be a total nuisance, it's not bad enough to land below number 6 on my list. Now, as with the previous list, I was also interested in knowing what you guys thought were the worst items in Isaac, and that's why I conducted an audience poll over at my Facebook page. I'll have the results of the voting for you a little bit later in this video. Number 5, Telepathy for Dummies. Passive persistent homing tiers? Pretty solid pickup, but a temporary homing ability that takes up your spacebar slot and takes a couple of rooms to charge? That's bad enough for number 5 on my list. The thing with Telepathy for Dummies is that not only is it a straight downgrade from the Spoonbender item, but homing tiers aren't always that great to begin with, assuming you have enough experience in the game to aim your shots reasonably well. So Telepathy for Dummies is that rare item that is not only not all that helpful, but it's objectively worse than another item in the game, and it monopolizes your spacebar slot, which could be used for so many other things. It might not be the very worst item in the game, but it is bad enough to wind up on my list in the number 5 spot. Number 4, Cat o' Nine Tails. Like I said about Wiggle Worm, Cat o' Nine Tails isn't so much bad as it's just totally bewildering. Every time I pick up this shot speed upgrade, I try to think of some niche situation where it might provide some overwhelming benefit, but my mind comes up blank every single time. Its apparent uselessness is compounded by the fact that for whatever reason, Cat o' Nine Tails seems to be one of the most commonly found items in the game, with a boss dropping it on what seems like every single run. The only positive thing I have to say about it is that at the very least it's a passive item and thus doesn't occupy the all-important spacebar slot. However, apart from that, I don't see much reason for Cat o' Nine Tails to be better than what I think is the 4th worst item in The Binding of Isaac. Number 3, the Poop. Blue Baby has enough disadvantages that giving him the poop as a starting item just seems cruel. there's exactly two positive things I can say about the poop. The first is that it might save you from damage occasionally if you manage to remember to use it right as an enemy approaches you. The second is that if you use it every room and shoot the resulting dung pile, you may end up amassing a few extra cents over the course of several floors. Apart from that, it's an almost entirely useless item made extra bad by the fact that it takes up your coveted active item slot. I know there's a certain contingent of diehard poop supporters, and I'm not here to judge what you're into, but I've never seen anything positive enough come out of this item to elevate it beyond the third worst item on my list. Number 2. Kamikaze. The fact that there's an item in Isaac worse than Kamikaze, which not only takes up your spacebar slot but also actively hurts you in order to damage your enemies, says a lot about my violent hatred for the item in the number 1 slot. Still, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Kamikaze is absolutely terrible in its own right, turning your character into a portable bomb that is sadly always caught in its own blast. It's not that Kamikaze is totally useless, quite the contrary actually. It can be very useful to do explosive damage to a boss or blow up tinted rocks if you're out of bombs. However, that use comes at an extremely high cost, and unless you have a staggering amount of health, it's likely that using Kamikaze will cause you more harm than good. For that, Kamikaze is my pick for the second worst item in Isaac. Now it's time to check in with the results of the audience poll from my Facebook page. In the number 3 spot for worst item in Isaac, you chose Notched Axe with 66 votes. The number 2 slot went to The Poop, which garnered 101 votes. And finally, Kamikaze took the number 1 spot easily with a remarkable 247 votes. As always, thanks to everyone for voting, and make sure to check out my Facebook page to participate in these polls in the future. So without further ado, my pick for the absolute worst number 1 bad item in The Binding of Isaac is Lemon Mishap. It takes an item being absolutely god-awful to overshadow some of these other atrocities for the worst item in the entire game, but luckily for us, Lemon Mishap is that item. It fulfills absolutely every criteria necessary to be considered the worst item in Isaac. It takes up your active slot, it requires multiple rooms to charge, and it doesn't do very much damage, and you're more likely to hurt yourself trying to use it effectively than you are to hurt your enemies. Overall, there's a few items on this list that have ended up helping me out in my Isaac adventures, if only rarely. Lemon Mishap, however, has shown me time and time again that it's almost 100% devoid of value, and that's why it's my pick for the absolute worst item in the entire game. Well, there you have it. As always, feel free to let me know how violently you disagree with me in the comments below, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys think. And again, thank you for watching and for supporting this series so far, and as always, I'll see you next time.